Now, tackling crime is one of the toughest jobs around, and one of the top people involved in dealing with it here wants to know what you think the policing priorities in the Solent area should be. I'm very pleased to welcome Michael Lane, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, into the studio. Thanks very much for coming in, Michael.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you've been in your post since you were elected in May. What have you been up to since then?
Well, the first key thing is not to arrive having presumed you know all the detail from being in post. So it's about listening, going out and meeting all the professionals, the partners, and importantly the community to hear what their concerns are, and then to absorb that information and begin the formulation of a police and crime plan.
And what have you been hearing?
Everything from the very small but annoying and antisocial and important at a one-by-one level, antisocial behaviour, parking, speeding, littering, cycling, those sort of things, and sometimes they're not so trivial under the same description, right up to considering the really important high volume energy issues for policing about serious and organised crime and counter-terrorism, specialist capabilities, and all of those sort of things. So it's from the small but important to individuals to those big items that are about keeping us all safer, which is what my job is, to contribute to keeping everybody safer.
And before you came to this, you had a kind of career in the military, and you were involved in kind of council work. What is it that made you want to do this?
It's a lifetime of service and enjoying the real energy that comes from, the motivation that comes from helping people. So I spent 30 years in the Royal Navy. I left that to do some community work and to continue with policy in London, and then decided to stand for the first time for election to be a local councillor. And then I thought this job was going to be difficult and my skills might be important and appropriate for being a police and crime commissioner. So I thought I should stand, and here I am.
Well, congratulations. And I mean, you've got
much.
some big issues on your plate.
That's for sure.
And one of the things we've seen recently in the wake of other votes that have happened since you were elected, namely the European referendum vote, in which 52% of people said they wanted to leave the EU, is a sort of spike in hate crime. And I mean, some of it might just be kind of media fanfare, some of it might be true. So, for example, this week we've had figures of 57% rise in hate crime on transport.
Okay.
Is that something that you are worried about, that could be an issue around here, kind of racist hate crime?
Of course it's a concern. You're quite right that the context nationally has exacerbated it in some areas for people who might not, of their own volition, thought to use hateful language and some aggression. But the really key thing is that any hate crime, one by one, is unacceptable. It is what it says. It's hateful. And we need to deal with that. And the community need to engage with all of us that are involved in keeping us safer to set the right context for the country to be inclusive, for us to be respectful of difference, and to respect difference one by one, the individuals. I was at Southampton Mellor a few weeks ago, and it was a brilliant, warm, engaging community event where people could walk in, walk out, and enjoy a lot that was going on. And by enjoy, I mean you could try some food and not like it, and it didn't matter. You could try some food and go, that's the best thing I've eaten for a while, and the same with music. Respecting the difference, allowing all genders, all races, all cultures, all preferences to mix together as a community that lives together, and to relish those things that they could and walk away from those things that they don't like. And that's part of the setting the community standards, I think.
And for people who aren't comfortable with those standards, so there are people who feel that we've simply had too many immigrants coming to this country and that this should stop. And that can fuel some, call it negative comments, call it hate crime, aggression. What can you do to kind of nip that in the bud?
If it's hate crime, it's wrong. If it's people asking legitimate questions about sustaining our community, about our ability to welcome and afford to welcome people, which we should want to do, then those are important questions. They're ones that I wrestle with. I think I made a few statements the other week saying there's a big difference between protecting our borders and our communities from those who are criminal in their intent and those who wish us harm. from those who are economic vibrants, which is a compliment in a way that they want to come here because they see their life more beneficial, from those who are really fleeing somewhere desperate and for whom the welcome in those senses should respect the awfulness of where they're coming from and the pressures for them, and differentiating those, being as welcoming, as inclusive and engaged as we can be, and finding ways to afford it so that the community that's here already is sustained as well and fairly and equally. Then those are complex issues that I wrestle with.
Very much. And one of the things we seem to always be reporting on this channel is kind of fraud and scamming, in particular targeting of kind of elderly or other vulnerable residents of the community. What can you do to kind of crack down on this scamming and conning people?
You're quite right. It's essential to engage in that. For me, I grew up in an environment where the telephone was a lifeline, and also it was a pleasure because it allowed you to talk to people, and older people or vulnerable people or people who are temporarily sick. That was how it was. These days, some of the businesses target people with nuisance calls, and many more are targeting elderly and vulnerable people with crime. It's a criminal activity exercised over the phone, and we need to do all we can to engage with the businesses that provide those services to diminish that. We need to provide systems that protect people, and then where we discover that it's criminal and abusive, then we need to intervene where we can.
Are there any kind of specific things that you're going to be doing?
We watch and care about these things a great deal. It is the balance for me is looking at what we do regionally and nationally for all of those crimes that aren't as local in where they're initiated from, to make sure we have national agendas for that. The National Crime Agency is increasingly looking at cybercrime, for example, but we locally need to understand where the local impact is in the community. So neighbourhood policing, reporting on 101 if you've experienced something like that, being good neighbours to people that you know that are vulnerable are things that we should all look to do.
And just quickly before we go, so I'm afraid we're running out of time,
Okay.
you're asking people for their views. You're welcome to come back. You're asking people for their views on what you should be focusing on. Just tell us really briefly about that if you could.
Absolutely. There's a survey on the website for Police and Crime Commissioner where I'm consulting on the plan. 1,500 people plus have already sent in their comments. Can I encourage everybody to look for that survey, and if you have views about what the priorities should be, fill them in and influence the plan. I represent all the people of Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton, and I want to hear your views and include them in my plan so that it reflects your priorities.
Michael Lane, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome, thank you.